There's a slope of broken gray stone in New Hampshire where the cloud comes down to the ground and the world shrinks to a few yards of moving gray. The wind across it is hard enough to take the sound out of your voice. Everything on that slope is soaked, and not by rain but by the fog itself condensing onto rock and hair and jacket and skin. In September of 1855, a 23-year-old woman named Lizzie Bourne lay down on that slope and stopped moving. She died of exposure on the summit cone of Mount Washington, a short distance below a stone building called the Tip Top House. The building was already standing. It is still there. She was something in the region of 200 feet from it. The length of a city block, a walk of under a minute. She could not see it. The mountain is 6,288 feet high, not quite half the height of Mount Rainier, a 2-hour drive from Boston. There has been a road to the top since 1861 and a railway climbing the other side since 1869, and today the summit holds a museum, a gift shop, an observation deck, and a cafeteria, where visitors in shorts and sneakers eat lunch off plastic trays. On the 12th of April, 1934, a weather observatory on that summit measured a gust of wind moving at 231 miles an hour, a reading, not a model, taken by people inside a small building bolted to bare rock who watched the instrument and wrote the number down. It remains the highest surface wind speed ever recorded by a staffed weather station anywhere on Earth, and it stood as the world record until an automated instrument on a barren island off Australia was hit by a cyclone and logged a higher one. Gusts at hurricane force are recorded up there on an average of 110 days a year. More than 160 people have died on the mountain since the first recorded death in 1849. Nearly half of them died in summer. This is the story of how the smallest number on the mountain, its own elevation, became the most dangerous one. Point 1. The fatal decision gets made in the parking lot at the bottom on a warm morning in July, and it is made in good faith. A family climbs out of a car with the doors open and the radio still playing. The dashboard thermometer says 78. There are picnic tables and a trail map behind cloudy glass. The path leaving the lot is wide and rooted and green, moss on the stones, a stream running fast over granite, sunlight coming down through birch leaves and coins. For the first 2 hours it is exactly what it appears to be, a walk in the woods. And the number on the map says 6,288 feet. People measure mountains against other mountains and against their own legs. 6,000 feet reads as a long day out. It does not read as Arctic. Nothing about it triggers the caution a 5-digit number triggers, and nothing about the drive up from the coast, with gas stations, motels, and a diner with a hand-painted sign, suggests anything worse than a hard afternoon. Then there is the infrastructure, which is a century and a half of accumulated reassurance. The Mount Washington Auto Road has run to the summit since 1861, 7.5 miles, climbing more than 4,000 vertical feet in switchbacks up the eastern flank, with a bumper sticker waiting at the end. Since 1869, a cog railway has pushed passengers up the western side, a steam-blackened locomotive grinding along a wooden trestle at walking pace. Between them, those two pieces of 19th century engineering deliver ordinary people to the summit of the most notorious patch of weather in the eastern United States in half an hour, without effort. Grandparents, toddlers in strollers, visitors in flip-flops carrying nothing at all. What waits at the top is a building with heat in it, a visitor center with a museum, a gift shop selling fleece and refrigerator magnets, an observation deck, and a cafeteria where a person can buy a hot dog and a coffee at 6,000 feet and drink it indoors, out of the wind. Chained to the rock alongside it stands the Mount Washington Observatory, where staff live and work year-round. All of it is true, and all of it is a message, and the message is consistent. This place is managed, this place is visited, this place is fine. None of it says anything about what happens above the tree line, on foot, when that building is an hour away and cannot be seen, or about the fact that this mountain does not merely receive weather, it manufactures its own. Point 2. Walk up on a clear day and the trees begin to shrink. Spruce that stood 40 feet tall in the valley are 20 feet, then 10, then waist high and bent sideways, growing away from the wind like hair combed flat by a hand. At around 4,400 feet, the forest stops altogether. Above it is bare rock, gravel, and low mats of vegetation pressed into the cracks. Alpine tundra. The same ground found in the Arctic, sitting in New England a few hours from a beach. Trees are not sentimental. They grow to the exact limit of where they can survive, and then they stop, and that line at 4,400 feet is not a scenic transition, but a survival boundary, drawn by the vegetation itself. A human body crossing it has no equivalent instinct and no alarm. Mount Washington is the highest peak in the northeastern United States, and several major storm tracks converge over that corner of the continent. The range it heads runs north to south, set broadside across the winds that sweep west to east over the width of the country. Air that has traveled 1,000 miles meets that wall and has nowhere to go but up, accelerating as it climbs. The 110 days come out of that. Hurricane force means a gust of 74 miles an hour or more, enough at sea level to strip the shingles off a roof, and the summit records one on very nearly 1 day in 3, not once a winter, not in a named storm, on a Tuesday in June as often as not. That wind also builds the mountain's signature surface. Water droplets in cloud, still liquid below freezing, strike anything solid, a rock, a cairn, a railing, and turn to ice on contact, growing outward into the wind in white, feathery blades. Rime ice coats the summit buildings for much of the year until they look like something dredged off the seafloor, and it turns a walkable granite slab into a sheet of glass set at an angle. At the edge of the Alpine Zone, where the last trees give out, the United States Forest Service has bolted a sign to a post, and signs of that kind have stood there since the 1920s. The area ahead has the worst weather in America. Many have died there from exposure, even in the summer. Turn back now if the weather is bad. On most mountains that kill people, the danger is concealed, under the snow, around the corner buried in a forecast nobody read. Here it is printed in plain English on a board at the exact point of no return, naming the mechanism, exposure, and naming the season, summer. People read it, photograph it, and keep walking. Point 3. A human body runs at 98.6 degrees and it has almost no room to move. Drop the core 3.5 degrees and it starts to malfunction. Drop it 9 and it starts to shut down. Drop it 16 and the heart becomes unreliable. 16 degrees is the entire operating range, and everything in a hiker's pack, every layer, every wrapper, every decision about when to turn around exists to defend it. The mountain has 4 ways in, and all 4 are visible from the trail if you know what you are looking at. The first is simple height. Air cools as it rises, 3 to 5 degrees for every 1,000 feet. The auto road alone climbs more than 4,000 feet from the gate to the summit, and a hiker on foot gains more. 78 degrees on a dashboard at the bottom is low 60s at the top on a generous day, and close to freezing on a bad summer afternoon while the valley below is still in shirt sleeves. Same mountain, same hour, 2 climates, and only one of them was on the thermometer anybody looked at. The second is the wind, and this is the one that does the killing. A jacket is not warm. A jacket holds still air against skin, and the fibers of a fleece and the down in a parka do exactly one job. Keep that thin envelope of air motionless long enough for a body to heat it. Watch what a gust does to a coat up on that ridge. It flattens the fabric against the chest, empties it, and refills it with cold air. Then it does it again, and again, hundreds of times a minute. The body never gets ahead of it. It spends the whole afternoon reheating its own insulation and losing. That is what wind chill measures. Not a feeling, a rate of loss. At a wind chill around 18 below, bare skin freezes in about half an hour. At 32 below, 10 minutes. At 48 below, 5. The strip of wrist between a glove and a sleeve, the cheek above a collar, an ear under a hood that has blown back, those are the parts on the clock. Put a wind that reaches hurricane force 1 day in 3 over a temperature that can approach freezing in July, and the arithmetic stops being seasonal. A summer afternoon on that ridge can produce a wind chill that would be respectable in a Canadian January. The third is water, and it is usually a cotton shirt. Water pulls heat out of a body about 25 times faster than air does. A cotton shirt that has got wet, from rain, from the fog, from 4 hours of climbing under a shell, has lost most of what made it clothing because the still air doing the work has been squeezed out and replaced by liquid lying flat against skin. It stops insulating and starts cooling, and a pack strap holds it there so it cannot even be shrugged off. And the summit spends much of the year inside cloud, not rain, cloud. A wet, fast-moving fog that beads on a sleeve and on eyebrows and on the outside of a jacket, and then on the inside of it, so that somebody who never walked through a single raindrop can be soaked to the base layer inside an hour. The fourth is the least dramatic and the most consequential, and it is usually visible in the pack. Climbing with a load burns several hundred calories an hour, and shivering burns more on top of it out of the same tank as the legs. Open the bag of somebody who got into trouble up there and the story is generally in it. One wrapper, a bottle with an inch left. A low furnace cannot hold 16 degrees against a wind that does not stop. No single one of the four is where something obviously terrible happens, and that is the whole problem. Each is survivable alone. Almost everybody who crosses that tree line in a windbreaker with a damp shirt has met all four before, separately, and gone home tired and fine. What happens when they arrive together is a sequence, and the sequence runs to a schedule. Point 4. Put 4 people on the ridge above the last trees at 4 in the afternoon. The cloud is down, the rock ahead goes 20 yards and turns gray, and the summit buildings are up there somewhere where nobody can see them. Here's what happens next, and all of it is visible from 10 feet away. The body protects the core by giving up the edges. Blood leaves the hands and the feet and the ears and the face and pulls back toward the heart and the lungs and the brain. So the first thing anybody sees is somebody standing on a rock in the wind with a jacket half open, working at a zip that will not close. A buckle fumbled twice. The clasp on a pack strap that was easy an hour ago and now has to be held up and looked at. Then the shivering starts. The emergency furnace coming on. That is a core around 95 degrees, and at 95 degrees a person does not look injured. They look cold and irritable, exactly like somebody having a mildly unpleasant afternoon. The correct move is to get behind a boulder, put on a layer, eat and turn around. What the group does instead is walk faster because walking makes heat, and because the top is only a little further. Between about 95 and 90 the failures move inward, and they surface as things you can watch. Speech thickens slightly, the way it does after one drink. Boots start catching on stones that were stepped over easily on the way up. A map comes half out of a pocket and goes back in unopened because unfolding it in the wind has become more trouble than it is worth. The party stops looking for the next cairn and starts following the person in front. In judgment, the faculty that would otherwise notice every item on that list is itself one of the things being switched off. The organ responsible for detecting the emergency is being disabled by it. Rescuers have a shorthand for the cluster: stumbles, mumbles, fumbles, grumbles. To the person 10 feet ahead, hood up, head down, walking into the wind, it reads as somebody being slow and grumpy at the end of a long day. Below about 90 degrees, the shivering stops. The body has been burning its last fuel to run that furnace, and when the fuel is gone, it abandons the strategy. From the outside, the person appears to improve. They have stopped shaking. They say they are fine. Some of them say they are warm. That is the exact moment it becomes critical, because the body has just given up the only method it had of making heat on its own. After that, it is fast and it is quiet. Walking becomes crawling on hands and knees over wet stone. Crawling becomes sitting down on a rock and not getting up. Some people feel a surge of warmth as the tightened vessels open all at once and start pulling their clothing off. A documented pattern called paradoxical undressing, and the reason a jacket is sometimes found folded on the gravel beside somebody. Others crawl in under a boulder to get out of the wind and stay there, which is where the dogs find them. Below about 82 degrees, the heart's rhythm goes unstable and it stops working as a pump. The whole progression, from a cold and slightly clumsy person to an unconscious one, can run in a couple of hours, on open rock, in wet clothes. In a wind that does not drop, it runs faster. The summit buildings stay exactly where they were the whole time, a mile away in the cloud, warm and lit and full of people eating lunch. Now, the numbers on this mountain do not put hypothermia at the top of the list. Falls do. Something on the order of 44 deaths are attributed to falls, against roughly 33 to hypothermia. with the rest spread across avalanche, heart failure, and everything else. That looks like a correction. It is the same mechanism wearing a different coat. Ask why people fall up there, and every answer is weather. They fall because rime ice has turned a walkable granite slab into glass set at an angle. They fall because a gust arrives at 70 miles per hour and takes them off their feet on a ridge with a drop down one side. They fall because their hands are too numb to hold anything, and their balance has already gone without their having noticed. They fall because the cloud came down, and they stepped confidently toward what they believed was the trail. Weather is the cause behind the causes. It kills people directly, and it arranges the circumstances of the deaths it does not cause directly. Point 5. The 19th of October, 1849. Late October on that mountain is not autumn in any sense a valley would recognize. It is gray cloud sitting on the ridge for days. Wet rock. Wind carrying water sideways and daylight draining out of the sky in the middle of the afternoon, with the tundra above the trees turned the color of rust. Frederick Strickland was descending that day when he lost his way and worked down into the Amanosuk Ravine, a steep, water-cut trough on the western side, choked with boulders and stunted trees and running water. He did not come out. His is the first recorded death on the mountain, the opening entry in a list that now runs past 160 names, and nearly half of those names belong to summer. Not to winter ice or February gales, to June, July, and August, on green days, when the lots at the bottom are full, the cafeteria at the top is open, and there is a queue for the observation deck. September 1855. Lizzie Bourne was 23 years old, and the mountain she went up that day was already, by the standards of its era, a developed attraction. Paths worn in by a generation of visitors, and at the very top a small stone building, low and heavy, built to be sat on by the wind. The tip-top house was standing, occupied, the obvious destination of anybody who reached the summit. September is the month when New England is at its most reassuring. The air turns clear, the light lengthens and goes gold, and the leaves at the bottom of the mountain begin to turn. It is the month people choose precisely because the weather has stopped being extreme. Somewhere on the upper mountain, the cloud came down. Inside that cloud, on that summit cone, the rock underfoot looks identical in every direction. Broken stone with nothing growing on it to navigate by. No landmark, no skyline, and no shadow because there is no sun to cast one. She was still on the cone when the daylight went, above the tree line on open rock in a temperature falling toward night, in a wind she could not get out of, inside a fog she could not see through. And the sequence began, the clumsy fingers, the shivering, the slowing, one small warm body against an unlimited supply of moving cold air. She lay down and died of exposure a short distance below that stone house, roughly 200 feet from it. 200 feet is the walk from a parking space to a supermarket door. There were walls, a roof, and other human beings that distance away from her, and she died in the open because she could not see them and could not know they were there. That is the fact that has kept her name alive for a century and a half. A 23-year-old on a September walk, dying of cold within shouting distance of a heated building. On a mountain people now drive up in ordinary cars. She was not being reckless, and she was not attempting anything outlandish. She did what an enormous number of people do every summer weekend, went up a famous mountain in a mild month, in reasonable weather, with the reasonable expectation of coming back down the same day. The mountain changed the terms while she was on it. 6 years after Frederick Strickland went into that ravine, and 6 years before the first road reached the summit, Lizzie Bourne established the pattern. Every one of the 160 deaths that followed has only decorated it. Not a failure of strength, but a gap between what a person expected to find up there and what was actually there. The sign at the tree line has said exposure and said summer, in plain English at eye level since the 1920s. The people who read it keep walking. Point 6. On this mountain, the number is the trap, 6,288 feet. It is printed on the trail map behind cloudy glass at the bottom, and carved into a wooden sign at the top that people queue to be photographed beside. And the instant anybody reads it, a calculation runs without being asked. They measure it against mountains they know and against their own legs, and out comes an expectation of difficulty. Psychologists call it anchoring. The first number in becomes the frame and everything afterward gets bent to fit it. So the sign about the worst weather in America reads as a boast, the kind of superlative a place puts on a board, because visitors enjoy superlatives. The anchor has already settled the question. This is a 6,000-foot mountain, and 6,000-foot mountains do not kill people in July. The gift shop says the same thing, and says it louder. Everybody knows that a place selling fleece and refrigerator magnets on its own summit is not the Himalaya. The cafeteria is a piece of information. The information is false. Then there is what a goal does to evidence. Once a target is set and effort has been spent against it, everything arriving afterwards sorts itself into two piles. Things that support going on and things that can be explained away. The wind picking up becomes a gust. The cloud building over the ridge becomes probably just passing through. The fingers that have stopped working properly become I'm just cold. On mountains, the extreme version has a name, summit fever. The state in which the top stops being one possible outcome of the day and becomes the reason the day exists. There is a debt already paid and the legs can feel it. The dry before dawn. The lunch packed on a kitchen counter the night before. Turning around a few hundred feet below the top means all of it was spent on a photograph of fog. Underneath both sits the most reliable bias in the catalog, the near universal conviction that bad outcomes are things that happen to other people, which is why the sign performs so poorly. A statistic about a place is heard as a description of a population, not as a forecast about oneself. A hiker can stand at that post in bright sunshine, read that many have died there of exposure even in the summer, believe every word of it, and make precisely no adjustment to the plan. The sign is understood to be describing the sort of person who dies on mountains. Nobody has ever been that sort of person from the inside. And then there are the other people who may be the strongest force of all. Look at what is actually in front of somebody standing at that sign on a July afternoon. The trail is busy. There are families on it. There are teenagers coming down in cotton hoodies eating candy bars. And ahead on the skyline, up on the summit, there are hundreds of visitors in fleece jackets standing around with coffee, photographing each other beside the elevation marker. If a place were genuinely dangerous, the mind reasons, it would not be crowded. Taking the crowd as proof is a shortcut that works almost everywhere in ordinary life. And here it fails completely for one reason: the crowd at the top drove up. Their presence is evidence about the road. It says nothing about the weather and nothing whatsoever about the miles of open rock between them and the person on foot looking up at them. None of this is a failure of intelligence. Every mechanism just described is a normal feature of a working brain that has kept human beings alive by helping them push through discomfort towards something worth having. The people who die on Mount Washington are not making an exotic error. They are running standard human software in one of the few places within a day's drive of a major city where standard human software gets a person killed. Every warning the mountain gives arrives in a language the biases can translate away. The cloud over the ridge looks the way cloud looks everywhere else. The cold at the tree line feels like being cold, which everybody has survived several thousand times. The first stage of hypothermia feels like a bad mood. No moment announces itself. There is only a wooden sign at the edge of the trees, saying the thing outright in black letters, read by somebody who feels perfectly fine, in a light breeze, with the summit buildings clear on the skyline, on a warm afternoon in July. Feeling fine is exactly what it feels like, right up until it isn't. Point 7. Suppose the sequence starts anyway. The cloud comes down at 5 in the afternoon, the wind gets up, the hands stop working, and a party of 4 stands on open rock realizing they cannot find the next cairn, the stacked stones that mark the route across ground with no trail worn into it. Help is closer on Mount Washington than on almost any comparable mountain in America, and very often it is still not close enough. There are people on that summit at this moment. The Mount Washington Observatory has staffed the top through the winters since the 1930s, and a scientific party first wintered on that summit more than a century and a half ago. There is a road which almost no comparable peak has, and a railway. In summer there are hundreds of people up there with hot drinks in their hands. None of that reaches somebody out on the open rock in a whiteout. A rescue has to be requested, which requires a charged phone, a signal, fingers that still work, and a head clear enough to describe a location on featureless ground. And by the time a group is in real trouble, several of those are already gone. It has to be organized, which takes time. Then people have to travel, on foot, up the same rock, into the same wind, in the same darkness, wearing headlamps that illuminate nothing but moving cloud a yard in front of them. Aircraft are frequently not an option. A helicopter depends on stable air and visibility, and this mountain specializes in producing neither. So the conditions that generate the emergency are the conditions that ground the aircraft. On the days the mountain is most likely to hurt somebody, the fastest tool available is the least likely to fly. The clock that matters is not the rescue clock, but the body's. A person below 90 degrees who has stopped shivering does not have an evening to spare. The window is measured in low single-figure hours, and it closes on a schedule set by wind speed and wet fabric, not by anybody's dispatch time, which is why the outcome on this mountain is so often decided long before the first phone call. The decisive choice was made 4 hours earlier at a wooden sign in bright sunshine, when turning around would have cost nothing but a photograph. The reassuring infrastructure is also seasonal. The gift shop closes, the cafeteria closes, the auto road shuts, and the cog railway stops running. For much of the year, the summit is a locked building on a rock in a wind, and the warm room full of people that a struggling hiker is walking toward in their imagination is simply not open. People do survive that summit, routinely, for months at a stretch, in conditions far beyond anything that has killed the day hikers in this account. The observatory crew live through winter storms that would be lethal within an hour to somebody in a windbreaker. Somebody was standing at those instruments on the 12th of April, 1934, when the gust hit 231 miles an hour and they recorded it, and finished the shift. The difference is not toughness and it is not luck. It is that they arrived believing exactly what the mountain is, dressed for what it does, carrying food and shelter and a plan for the day the weather turns, which on that summit is 1 day in 3. Mount Washington is not unsurvivable, only unsurvivable unprepared. September of 1855. A 23-year-old lying down on wet broken rock in a gray fog with the wind going over her. 200 feet away, up the slope, there was a stone house with walls and a roof and a fire in it. It had been there for years. It is there today. A low gray building you can walk up to on a summer morning and put your hand on, with a coffee from the cafeteria in the other hand and 100 tourists photographing the view behind you. That distance is under a minute of walking. She did not know which way it was. That is the whole mountain, compressed into 200 feet of wet granite. Not a lack of strength, not a lack of nerve, not some spectacular error of judgment a sensible person would never make. Just a gap between what she believed she had walked into that afternoon and what she had actually walked into. Everything that has happened on that summit cone in the 170 years since sits inside the same gap. The falls on the rime ice, the hikers found above the tree line in cotton shirts in July, the people who read the sign and kept going because the sun was out and the top was right there. The sign is still standing at the edge of the trees. It still says exposure, and it still says even in the summer. Every year thousands of people read it in good weather, with the tundra glowing and the summit buildings clear on the skyline, and every year the great majority of them walk up, eat lunch at the top, and come down perfectly fine. If the cloud came down on you at 5 in the afternoon on a warm day, an hour above the last trees, would there be anything in your pack that could keep you alive in that wind until morning? Or would you be carrying only the confidence you set out with, and 6,288 feet of mountain you had already decided was small?